Did you want to start? Welcome, everyone, and welcome especially to our guest, Hodgson, Professor Ashley Hodgson. We are so happy to have you here and be in dialogue with you. And um, just by way of reminder, this is the System of Systems Thinkers, Women in Systems Thinking Dialogue series. This is the second of our conversations this year. And we have another one coming up on, I think, September 8th, 17th, 18th. Felicia, you want to correct me? Anyway, be on the lookout. What's that?
I'll check on that.
Okay. Anyway, September. So be on the lookout for that next one. And in the meantime, we're here today to have a really fun conversation about systemic shifts in paradigms, which is one of my favorite topics. Welcome, Pam. Um, and Ashley, there's really no better person that I've heard from recently than Ashley to help us all sort of access this thinking. It's big picture thinking, kind of abstract thinking, but in a way that feels understandable. So I'm just thrilled to be able to have her here. And just to set the tone for today, we're going to have a couple of breakouts. Ashley's going to present, and we're also going to, she's got some prompts to discuss in breakouts. And so we just invite you and ask you to be kind to everyone and respect everyone as you go into breakout, and obviously respect our speaker when you ask questions, which we'll have time for towards the end. And we invite you to introduce yourself in the chat if you'd like to do that. Where are you hailing from today? And we'll now enter into a little bit of actually, I should just give a little bit more context about the dialogue series. So we have been privileged to be in conversation and dialogue with um, really the most renowned women in the systems thinking field that are alive today, and actually is the latest in that installment. And so we have developed a collection of beautiful recordings that you all can access on our channel, our YouTube channel, but also on our website. And we just invite you to, if you haven't participated in any of those earlier conversations, or even if you have, they're worth a rewatch. And it just, the point of this series is to really elevate the voices of women in the systems thinking field, where, like just like in every other field, we have to sort of be proactive about elevating women's voices. So that's what brings us here. And we will now just enter into a brief moment of silence, and just to get us grounded and arriving in the space today. So if you'd like, you can turn off your camera, and I just invite you to think about what inspires you about transforming systems for just a moment. And we can begin now. Okay, whenever you're ready, I invite you to come back into the space, and we'll get started. So, Ashley, I just want to also say that as usual, we don't read our guest speakers' bios, but you can read more about Ashley on our website, and she may share some things about her bio as well. But you can find the full details of her bio on our website, and also on her two YouTube channels. I think you can learn more about her there. So, with that, Ashley, welcome.
Thank you. All right, I'm going to share my screen. Okay. All right, yeah. So where are we going today? The New Enlightenment is sort of the analogy I use for what I'm doing with systems thinking, basically. And it has to do with paradigm shifts. So I'm going to talk about what are paradigm shifts, how does that apply to this moment in history? How does that relate to systems thinking? I'm going to talk a little bit about Ian McGilchrist's right brain and left hemisphere of the brain theory and how that relates to this paradigm shift and system thinking. And then specifically, I hope our discussion brings up a discussion of digital environments and the way information moves in digital environments, some of the problems with that, and different ideas for restructuring that. So the Old Enlightenment was the time period when we had the scientific revolution, we had the American Revolution, the French Revolution, and one of the key things happening in that time was they were trying to get out from under the thumb of these power structures of the time that had sort of grown in their power. And in systems thinking, power to the powerful is one of these dynamics that shows up in a lot of systems, including economic systems and governance systems. And when that escalates to the point where it's causing friction and conflict, that is a moment that's ripe for paradigm shifts. And these are just some of the concepts that became the sort of gave birth to themselves during this time: checks and balances on power, due process, the scientific method, free speech, human rights, universal education. So all of these were in part, at least, ways of getting out from under the thumb of the power to the powerful dynamic. But since then, the system has once again succumbed to power to the powerful, and the new digital age, the new pace of technology and interconnections and how interconnected the world is, things have changed such that we are living in this moment in history that could be another change point, where once again we've got to get out from under the thumb of existing power structures. And that's where the New Enlightenment comes into play. It's this paradigm shifts now in these underlying concepts that could help us restructure what people consider to be legitimate, how resources flow, which of course is the way I define economics. It's the flow of resources. So I do think of economics as this system, and I think biological systems are a good analogy. So yeah, paradigm shifts in these three realms: economics, governance, and knowledge systems. And the three are really interconnected. As a matter of fact, I think to some degree, if you're going to have to argue which of these is the most foundational, it would be knowledge systems, because economic flow, of course, depends on people's understanding of their own desires. It depends on people's desires themselves, which relates to knowledge flow. The way organizations like companies work, that depends on knowledge about efficiency. So knowledge systems are going to underpin both economics and governance. All right, so when I say paradigm shift, what is a paradigm shift and what does that look like in today's context? So The Structure of Scientific Revolutions was a book by Thomas Kuhn that laid out how paradigm shifts work in academia. And essentially, it's where if you think about an academic field, they have this foundational knowledge within their field. So in biology, that might be theory of evolution and the structure of a cell. It's just this base information that anybody who's working in the field of biology is building up from those foundations. And what happens in a field is you get thought leaders. All fields are embedded in human communities, and human communities have wills and desires just like humans do. where, and just like humans do, there's going to be conflicting wills and desires. So like curiosity is driving this community, but also status and legitimacy and all that. So what is a paradigm? Oh, yeah, and the paradigm also includes bounds around what is an appropriate question for people in that field. So it's the Overton window within the field. So paradigm shift happens when you've got a heretic that comes along and starts to question a piece of foundational knowledge. And that, of course, is really threatening to people who are leaders in the field because it potentially delegitimizes their body of academic work, which is the source of their status and their power. And so the community finds that to be threatening, and the immune system, because of course, biological analogies, I think, are the best way of thinking about this. The immune system of the community will oftentimes be like, wait a second, this heretic is actually putting people in the community at risk, our status, our legitimacy at risk. So they'll attack this heretic who's questioning this piece of foundational knowledge. Now, the problem is if the heretic actually has some good points about that piece of foundational knowledge not working, what can happen is that some of the people start to watch the heretic, maybe join in the conversation. Now, of course, if you join in that conversation, you might get the ire of the community, you might get rejected by the community. But eventually, scientific knowledge moves forward one funeral at a time. So eventually the thought leaders retire, and it becomes more acceptable to listen to the heretic and question the heretic. And this is where the paradigm shift happens. It's where once you can actually listen to this questioning of that piece of foundational knowledge, this new community around the heretic forms their own new foundational knowledge. And it's not overturning all of the foundational knowledge from that field before. Rather, it's sort of setting up new structures that will help the field move forward without the questionable piece of foundational knowledge. And you can kind of see the paradigm shift and how it moves out. And then eventually, of course, that heretic becomes the new thought leader, and the thought leaders are responsible for maintaining what are the edges of the paradigm, what is the new Overton window, that kind of thing. All right, so how does this relate to systems thinking? Well, I actually do think one of the paradigm shifts we need right now is going to be a paradigm shift toward system thinking, especially I think in the scientific realm, but not just the scientific realm, around other realms of governance and whatnot, that instead of thinking of things as groups of people, we think of things as, okay, it's a system where the group of people has relationships and dynamics, and it's changing and moving and evolving. And so I assume this group knows systems thinking pretty well. But one of the changes I think will be switches from mechanical analogies to biological analogies, because biological systems have these flow properties, these evolutionary properties. And I think the thinker who is almost prophetic in the way he's characterizing problems with thinking in the modern system is Ian McGilchrist. He's written these two books, The Master and His Emissary and The Matter with Things. And the basic premise is he's looking at the human brain and saying, why is the human brain split down the center? And why are the two sides, the two hemispheres of the brain kept separate? And his answer is that they have two different types of attention that these two centers of the brain specialize in, and that you need both types of attention to function well. But his thesis is that the right brain is actually more powerful and should be the master. The left brain should be the emissary, and our modern culture has it in reverse. And I like his analogy with the birds. It's that, okay, a bird needs to do two things. It needs to get the worm. That's the part of it that exerts power in the world, that apprehends something, but it also needs to make sure it's not eaten by a predator. So that's the part of the brain that pays a generalized attention to the world, that's trying to perceive reality, to perceive threats. So the left brain is in charge of language, models. It's a very certain in its stance toward the world. It views things as being static, and its emotional landscape for the left brain is anger and disgust, which of course are both emotions associated with power and how you exert power in the world. Whereas the right brain is trying to understand the world as it is. It understands things through a dynamic understanding. Things are constantly changing. It doesn't lock things down. He characterizes it by a gestalt, which is just an understanding of the whole, as opposed to the understanding of the parts. And the right brain is the part that actually can perceive reality, so can perceive it when the left brain is engaging in bullshit. So those two different characterizations, two different types of attention, you need them both. But certainly the modern discourse, and even the modern understanding of the world tends to lean more heavily on left brain. And that's causing some of the problems we've got. And of course, that relates to systems thinking, because systems thinking is way more of a right brain way of perceiving the world. I also already mentioned, instead of thinking of just groups of people, which is a static way of thinking about humans, thinking about them in terms of systems where you've got rules, dynamics, and relationships. But there's also this notion of truth, and truth, the left brain views truth as being binary. Either it's true or it's false. The left brain really likes binaries, whereas the right brain can acknowledge, wait a second, there's orientation toward truth. There's a relationship with the truth where you can be farther from the truth or closer to the truth, even if you're not perfectly at the truth, which none of us can really ever be perfectly at the truth. And one dynamic I've noticed a lot with social media recently is that a lot of times you have somebody who has sort of a way of looking at the world it's a model, or it's a take, and it's not the truth, because nobody can fully arrive at the truth. But social media sort of imposes this way of thinking where a lot of people will look at that and be like, that's wrong, I'm bringing you down by saying that's false. And yet the person who's sort of pointing the finger and saying that's false, they clearly have no interest in that particular truth. The interest there is really about taking that person down a notch or just discrediting them. It's really about power over that person. And so I think it is important to think about truth as we have a relationship with the truth that's either moving toward it or moving away from it. And that orientation toward it, I think, is a more right brain way of thinking about truth. Whereas the is it true or false is looking for the power of dismissing the person. And of course, the problem with scientific endeavors, and of course, I strongly support science, and McGilchrist does as well. But because science often has to isolate something from its context to study it, it loses the relational aspect of things. And the way knowledge is built is by building everything except the relationships, where the relationships are really the essence of what makes something good and meaningful. Let's see. So yeah, how does this relate to paradigm shifts in knowledge? Oh, I've already kind of covered this, that economics and governance are subsystems of knowledge systems. But how do we think about knowledge systems in a more systems-like way? And I think network theory is an important subset of systems thinking, where we have people who are connected and information travels between people, where the nature of connections can be strong or weak. Like you trust somebody, you know somebody well, so information travels easily between those two people. Or you perhaps distrust somebody, they've shown themselves to be untrustworthy, so information will not travel along that particular node. And I think networks thinking is a helpful way about thinking about how information spreads through a network. Contempt, I think contempt, this is an emotion associated with the left brain that is an emotion of power, exerting power. I define it as an attitude of disgust arising from long-standing negative thoughts about a group or person being morally inferior, intellectually inferior, or beneath consideration. And I think this emotion is entering our information systems in a way that breaks down trust and stops the flow of information, stops the building of healthy knowledge systems. And of course, I won't talk too much about the problems with social media and the problems with our information environment, but just I want to say a few things to characterize them. For one, there's information overload in the online world and everywhere. And it's not just that, it's that there's this competition over who gets attention that causes people to package their particular thing in a way that's maximally threatening. Like, pay attention to my thing. And my issue may be really, really important. It may be something that's going really wrong in the world, and we need people to pay attention to it in the hopes that it can get good governance. But that leads to this information environment that's maximally threatening, which is hard to deal with. So people deal with it by having these quick ways of dismissing each other. Ugh, it's this fireball of terrifyingly packaged information coming at me. How do I dismiss it in a way that's psychologically satisfying? Because I can't handle all of this at once. And the result is we dismiss people and ideas and whatnot for really shallow reasons. Just whatever is psychologically satisfying. And of course, dismissing people like this, that's going to be experienced on the other side as contempt. So yeah, people fear different things. And those fears are not able to be realized or not able to be addressed in this kind of environment. Strawman mythologies, this is another concept I use a lot, where when people dismiss other groups, it's not just this one-off dismissal, it's an entire mythology around that group and what they're like and what they care about and how stupid or immoral that group is, that's built up to handle the arguments they may package to try to be heard across groups. So it's not just one by one strawman mythology or strawman arguments dismissing them. It's entire strawman mythologies that have built up in this systems way, in this evolutionary way, to be fairly robust, so that groups cannot break through each other's shield. Okay. Yeah, last bit here. Okay, so if we're thinking about digital spaces, this is where knowledge systems evolve. And they evolve like evolution in a biological system, where they're changing pretty quickly, and the change depends on the relationships along which information flows. They depend on these networks. So I just want to give one, this is just an idea. This presentation is not about this particular idea. It's more of an example of an idea of how could we change systems to better build trust and better build understanding and knowledge systems that evolve in a positive direction. So if we think about factions, these different groups, with each group sort of has their most important issues and their strawman mythologies about the other groups and their contempt toward other groups, their view of themselves. Groups sort of develop this in social media space in ways that are, I think, internally coherent in general for these groups. So the question is, how do you get these groups to actually talk in a way that is promoting understanding as opposed to just dismissing or just building up the strawman mythologies of each other? And I view it as every group has part of the truth, even if only 1%. Some groups are 99% wrong and 1% right. In other groups, maybe it's the reverse. But none of them are to be entirely dismissed. And how do you find the percentage of them that is correct? And of course, I think a lot of the problems that each group sees, they see a different part of the problem with the meta crisis. And these problems are intertwined. So it's not like, I think it's experienced as a zero-sum game between the issues I care about and the issues you care about. But in fact, it's not a zero-sum game. So my idea, or at least the one I'm going to put forward quickly here, is bubble cluster governance, which is where people can sign up for sense-making groups where they can be matched with people from other clusters in a group that goes offline and builds trust separately. Because I think a lot of this trust building cannot take place in digital spaces. Digital spaces have properties that make them not sink in. But if you have a group of people where there's some benefit to you developing an internal group dynamic, an internal spirit of the group, and trying to understand each other, if that is incentivized at the end of the day, which in this idea it would be, then I think that could be one way of building trust across these groups. So you've got a bunch of clusters of people who have been matched, and there could be lots of ways of matching people. I think you couldn't just randomly match people and assume that group would work, because, you know, people fall off the face of the earth and drop out and whatnot. But you need a way of getting these groups to sustain. And then give them a year to build rapport and build an understanding of each other's perspectives. And then have the groups present something. And maybe that's a video, maybe it's a series of articles, maybe it's a podcast discussion, something that's for the public that represents their evolved sense making over the year that they've gotten to know each other. And based on that, let the public interact with or vote on or something. Which of these groups would you trust to actually do good governance? And this could be good governance of the digital spaces, or it could be governance of something else, governance of a natural resource or whatnot. Okay, so that's just one idea. I think my main thesis is to introduce this and just to get the conversation going. How do we design digital knowledge systems to such that it evolves in a way that has trust built in and has just like stronger sense making? All right, so and these are the discussion questions for the first breakout session. So of course, discuss whatever compels you, but what strawman mythologies bother you? Does contempt and hostility relate to left brain thinking? If so, how? And how could that be overcome in a digital environment? What factors destroy trust? And how do digital environments contribute to that? How could digital environments improve that? What design of digital spaces could turn down the volume of hostility between groups so that needed information flows between groups more easily? What motivates a person to open their mind? Is contempt ever legitimate? And then how does information flow relate to all of this? I guess I should stop sharing.
Wow,
I
that's a lot.
think maybe to leave it for a couple seconds to just let it sink in, because then I'll open the breakouts for 10 minutes. So you'll be paired with one other person or two other people. And you can address any of these topics as you feel called to.
Okay.
I'm going to try also, Carolina, I was thinking I could try to, well, I just took a picture of the prompts and I was going to try to upload it into the chat, but I guess that won't transfer to the rooms, right?
Yeah, that's right. People could download it anyway.
Okay. Yeah, maybe people can take a screenshot if they want. All right.
Okay.
Anybody have any questions? Or do you have enough to work with? Okay. All right.
Yeah. Opening the rooms now then. Enjoy your conversation.
Did we lose a bunch of people?
No, some folks came back, others before the 30-second countdown.
Oh, okay. Hi, everybody. Good to see you, your faces.
Now I think we have everyone.
Okay, welcome back.
So what did you all discuss in your groups? Yeah.
Yeah, hi. First, I just want to say thank you, Ashley, so much. I have been following you for not very long, but absolutely love what you're doing, and what we talked about in our group. Well, I shared how in the 1990s, I was the little heretic in my Econ 101 and almost got kicked out of class because I was questioning the very things that you are now espousing at the university level as being worthy questions. Not that I was articulated or credentialed in any way, so I was easily dismissed, but it's so wonderful to see the evolution in the field of economics in academia. Finally, you are a heretic that is building momentum, and I really appreciate your work. So I just wanted to say that for sure. And then the question that I have that I brought to the group and would be interested in your take is on the idea that the immune system is trying to kill the heretic, right? And so, and that was a connection that I got from your share. I love the biological systems theory around the immune system trying to save itself, whether it's cancer or whatever it is. It's trying to save itself, and contempt and the role that contempt and disgust play as tools of the immune system. Are you able to, would it be okay for Ashley to speak to that? Or yeah, I would love it.
Oh yeah, I liked what you said. I think, yeah, the contempt in the immune system, it pops up everywhere. And yeah, and the weird thing is, a system is more anti-fragile if it allows the heretic space to actually question things that need to be changed. So like a healthier immune system would not kill the heretic. But if the immune system's main purpose is the status as opposed to the truth, then it's almost like what curiosity versus status as the driver behind this group. Which one is going to win out? And if it's status at all, or if it's legitimacy at all, then the immune system will kill the heretic.
Yeah, status, that's such a good point. That's such a shallow goal. And yet it seems to be ever present in the world today, where status is really the winner, power and status. Yeah, great point.
Can I just bounce off of that? I wondered if you could go back to the slide. You kind of skipped over it on empathy, because that's the thing I'm interested in. And I was just thinking about status, because I've been in situations like that. And reflecting back on those situations, one thing that I've recognized is sometimes this apparent need for status, like there's other needs underlying it, and it could be a need for belonging, right? And recognizing, like part of dealing with contempt, which I'm guilty of, I roll my eyes. I'm not good at keeping it in check. And one thing I've had to work on is, what is the underlying need? That there is something that that people are searching for that is legitimate underneath those other apparent trappings. So status could mean, I want to belong to this group, and I'm risking something if maybe I'm not a bystander, if I stand up for this person, my sense of belonging, my sense of identity, and that kind of thing. So I just wanted to add that.
I feel like that's really important with empathy, that yeah, even the part that's acting against the contempt, yeah, there's something behind it that is legitimate, even if most of it is just Jeremy.
Oh, yeah, Deb, it sounded like you're coming from, I mean, the framework you're thinking from reminds me of Marshall Rosenberg's nonviolent communication. Yeah, I was sharing in my breakout session about how that, for me, that was sort of the opening to having some positive imagination about how these issues could be addressed. Ashley, are you familiar with this?
I've heard of it. I haven't read the book. It's on my list.
Yeah, I mean, the book is one thing. The workshop recordings I think are very much more immersive. There's a specific playlist. Some of them can be found online, but I have a link I can share to the chat about these specific. I mean, I listened to them like dozens of times and always got new things. But the book's good too. I just didn't know how to implement it in a way that the recordings made more transparent.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that.
Okay,
Michelle?
I'll get that in the background. Go ahead.
I'd like to play a little bit with the word heretic here.
Mm-hmm.
And we're talking about paradigm shifts and frameworks. So already when you say the heretic, it's like you stand out. And I'm working to go in the direction of allowing difference. So if I'm a heretic, I'm really noticing something or bringing something that's really different. And so I'm interested in getting better at having more difference, being able to live with more differences. So instead of being the heretic, can I get comfortable in a room with a lot of different people, whether they unify together in their kind of conditioned mind, or they have various kinds of thoughts, and depending on what level we're talking about here, because at some level everybody's thinking differently, and at some level they're all agreeing on some generalizations. So how do I let myself, can I be big enough that I could just be here and contribute and participate and say what I'm saying, and we'll let it go where it's going, and not feel like I am so I want that to be the normal kind of thing. So how do I go about that? So I'm putting that on the table.
I feel like that's a good question, because there's sort of two places of agency, where one is the heretic themselves and the other is the ethos of the group. And in some ways, like when the person becomes a heretic, it's like in the negotiation of the Overton window, the negotiation of where is this dialogue allowed to go. And I think the problem with the heretic from the group's perspective, even though I'm for the heretic, is that by speaking up and engaging people in these questions, the questioning of the piece of foundational knowledge, they end up just that dialogue, like just them participating, ends up changing the Overton window in a way that is threatening to some members of the group. And so it's almost like this thing, the Overton window, is the battle over that. I don't think can be avoided through acceptance of the heretic, of the people around them. Tell me
Actually,
how
could
I'm
I
wrong, though. I like the tension.
Sorry to interrupt you. I was just going to say, would you mind elaborating on the Overton window just for those who may not have been exposed to that concept?
Yeah, the Overton window is the bounds of what is acceptable discourse. And I mean, if it's an academic field, that's like, what is a legitimate biological question or a legitimate biological theory? What is legitimate to be part of the conversation? And I think that's the thing that gets renegotiated if the heretic is not shut down through social enforcement.
So we had another breakout built into the agenda. I don't know if we want to move back into breakouts with the same question list and to continue just whatever thread is piquing everyone's interest with a different partner, or does it sound like a good plan? Or
Yeah.
okay, great.
Okay, I'm
So
going
then,
to share the screen, as again I also have the slide here. So you'll be able to see for a few minutes, for a few seconds, the question. Let me just open it here. And then I'll recreate the breakout, so you'll get to talk to a new group about a different set of questions. So let's see here.
And Carrie brought up a really good point that I think needs consideration with these groups, is that how do you build, what do you do about persistence of the groups when people can be fickle and they drop out of groups easily and there's so much flow that it's hard to create these consistent relationships? I just thought that was a good question.
Has everyone had time to take a look at the questions? We good? Okay, I'm gonna take this as consent now. So I'm going to reopen the breakouts. So you will have another 10 minutes, this time with a different group of people. So I'm going to open the rooms. Please enjoy the conversation and see you here again in a little bit.
Welcome back, everyone. I hope you had a great conversation. We have plenty of time for some additional harvesting and any questions that you might have for Ashley.
I'm curious what you all talked about.
I enjoyed what Tanuja was saying, and maybe if she's willing to talk about it directly, about this devaluing of our own personal experience in digital spaces. Your mute's on.
Muted.
Somehow we've decided to give more credence and more value to what we read online, to the written word, to the AI word, and less to our individual experiences. But this is both, this has to do with digital as well as our sciences. And very much a systems thinking question here. So for example, if someone reads something in the New York Times about, let's say, a disease, and I come in and I say, but that's not how I felt it, I will be dismissed as being anecdotal. Right? So it's the same thing is reflected in pretty much every field.
That is
So that we're giving away our sense making and our agency, we're giving it away to the digital space. And the digital space, by almost definition, is anonymous. So we don't really know who is forming those opinions. And we're giving all of that away to that anonymous entity.
absolutely. Michelle.
I'd like to respond to that. I don't know if we, in this format, dialogue format, whether we're responding or not, but so if you say something and you get dismissed, are you you said we also, I wanted to ask you, is that your experience rather than the general, what you see the general kind of thing?
It is both personal and also within, when I'm in a group, I see that happening.
And so I think what the situation, the life where humanity is at is being called for now is that you feel dismissed, you're being dismissed on the mental level, but on a feeling level or on growing a way of being present where you don't feel dismissed. You say, you've learned to be, we say grounded and stuff like that, but you're present and you're grounded and they have their opinion, but you're not, it doesn't shape, or it tends not to shape. I mean, this is a continual learning that we have to be doing. So I just want to put in that kind of element that if we're at the layer where everybody else on that mental layer only, yes, we feel dismissed. But I don't like being dismissed. I want to find a root inside myself where I can still be present, that I don't have to make them other, that I don't have to do numbers, that I don't have to argue, that I don't have to get into my ego. And that I feel like as I participate in these groups, even online, I'm being called upon And if I'm not being changed by my participation here, if I'm not being changed by you being here, it's not that I don't want to be here. It's not good enough.
I do think there's something real to, like, there is something real to being dismissed in terms of when someone isn't willing to go deeper with you, like if they're not willing to like take their consciousness and expand it enough to like wrestle with or sort of mull over your experiences, it's like, okay, their ability to process anything you say is too limited to handle your experiences. And I do think we're losing the ability to like sit with and just be like, wait a second, I want to absorb what this person is saying and think about it. And so I do think there can be a real intuition that senses something that is real there, even though we're never perfect at intuiting other people's conscious state. That conscious state can be open or closed. So yeah.
Co-host with the mostest.
I had just a thought about number one, following on from my partner in the breakout group, Tia, something she said. She mentioned with regard to number one, in what ways do current digital structures facilitate left brain thinking? And she pointed out, like, you know, the platform itself, it facilitates left brain thinking, which reminded me that I've actually spent quite a bit of time reflecting on sort of two-dimensional interfaces versus three-dimensional, to the degree that I like got an Oculus Rift several years ago and started playing with what might be possible as a promoter of systems thinking, sort of feeling like maybe in 3 dimensions there's more scope for communicating about systems than in 2 dimensions, which then kind of leads to a whole reflection on just receiving information in a 2-dimensional format versus 3-dimensional. And like, even just reading, you know, whether your tradition reads like this or whether it's like this, it's very linear, the way we read. And if that's the primary mode through which we receive, you know, book knowledge or, you know, what is true, like, you know, with the New York Times article or what have you, it just makes me think about what's lost when you go from an oral to a written, you know, sort of knowledge-based culture or tradition.
That's so true. I feel like our brains are being trained to no longer perceive the types of things that are rich and embedded in the real world, because it's like so much of our training of how we listen is through these digital spaces. So like all the avenues of body language and just sensing somebody's, like, what do they actually mean? Their words can't fully capture it. You have to kind of get it through these other senses. And those are withering away as we lose practice in them. Michael.
Hello. Thank you. Thank you on several fronts. First, I'd like to thank you for something that you already did before. That probably is what got you the invitation, but that's been enormously helpful to me personally, and I suspect to many others. And so I'm not going to, and that is to synthesize books that I might or might not have read into digestible, clear, to be an educator in the world of these ideas, and to give yourself to do that and to do that beautifully. I just want to thank you for both today and for that act of narrating and adding to the digital field. Yeah, and I struggle sometimes with systems conversations because I have a diagram here that kind of summarizes what for me has been, it was shorthand for what I would call a spiritual journey, but you could say that it was really a sense making of healing the compass within, then the co-regulating with, let's call, other humans, and then beyond humans, within, between, and beyond. And this the vocabularies and I often project onto others what is my own frame of reference, whether it's as a male, whether it's as an English speaker, or whatever, and that sensing what is the system that we're talking about and how is it evolving is often one of the hardest things to even begin to clarify for me, in order to then develop capacity for agency. Otherwise, I'm really just running in my own kind of projected rumination fantasy of the world, and not really sure if we're in a conversation, or if the system is systeming, if you will. And so I just love that you're taking information overload and you're synthesizing it into mimetic digestible units that enable us to go back and forth. And that I find it's that proto-languaging and proto-meming into new ways of understanding that has been, each of those spiritual awakenings has come from people like yourself. So I know that was just a lot of love, blah, 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 blah. Just thank you. And thank you for the folks that, the Carolinas and the Felicias, and Carrie, that are really the holders of this conversation, that are enabling this to also grow in the world, the mycelial drivers of what is happening here. So, okay, Mike returned.
Thank you so much. Yeah. Yeah, I know what you're talking about with the, you never know if we're part of the same conversation when we're talking about systems, because, and this is kind of something I struggle with almost on my channel, is I see the same patterns happening in different conversations about completely different things. It's like, wait a second, that conversation over there, they're talking about governance or something, and over here they're talking about classroom dynamics, and over here they're talking about biological systems. And it's like I see the same pattern in all of those. So I try to extrapolate. And the weird thing about it, though, is that it's like a conversation that's trying to map on different conversations where the particulars actually do matter. And yet I'm trying not to use the particulars. This is something I struggle with a lot when trying to figure out how specific to get and what examples do I allow to be articulated, when so many of those examples would shut people down, and just because people have this shutdown mode, oh, they're using that word, and I don't like people who use that word. So if you allude to the fact that I'm looking at that conversation, I don't know, it's so easy for people to shut down in the digital space. But yeah, thank you.
So Ashley, one of the things I appreciate about McGilchrist's template is how it kind of gives a sense of, he talks about it in terms of different ways of relating, different modes of attention. And actually for me, this is where the NVC, the nonviolent communication as a way of kind of cluing into, like, even the question of how am I listening right now? And, being aware of that also gives me a sense of, it gives me more visibility into, how I might be received, in which, informs how I would speak as well. But yeah, actually, so much I think of what we're dealing with here is how do we scale trust, beyond the Dunbar number, which is, that's where we're in person. We have all these cues. We're embedded in this situation where the proper incentives are sort of manifest. That's how we became who we are today. And yet we've got all this global point-to-point communication and all this other stuff. And yeah, we haven't scaled the sort of that backgrounds that was previously all inside of the phenomenology of our experience day to day.
Absolutely, that scaling is such a trick. Yeah, because you're right. when we talk with someone that we don't know very well, we tend to take some map of how somebody else is, or some group, we've got a map of that group, and we project it onto them. And just the projection onto them of how we're trying to understand them, people resist that for good reason. But how do you interact with someone when it's like, okay, if we're in a small group that we all know each other, we do have maps of people in that small group. It's just those maps actually take their real behavior into effect, rather than like some aggregated version of people like them. That it's easy for that to just build in contempt without realizing it.
That you're speaking to the value of being present, and all the feedback we can get along the way as life reveals itself to us.
Yeah. That the question of how we scale that up, it's like, okay, we have to scale it up because we live in a system that's global, and that, you know, we can't just suddenly shut down into small communities entirely. But
yeah, I really like John Lennon's declaration and Yoko Ono's declaration of Newtopia as sort of the creation of an identity where I'm not sure if you're familiar with this, but in 1978 they came out and said that they are ambassadors to the from the conceptual country of Newtopia, and that by hearing about Newtopia you can declare yourself an ambassador. And this was inside of their anti-Vietnam, their peace effort at that time, correlating to Vietnam, and the being in bed and doing everything for peace and so forth. And I mean, I'm really a fan of his sort of game theory, where what I'm reading about what he was saying is that people don't want to come out that they're for war, but when the background is we want peace, and I think that the military industrial complex has the biggest bounty on its head for being counterproductive. I mean, no one wants their resources used in that way, but just creating this conversation or consensus for what we all actually want, and use the phrase, the more beautiful world our hearts know is possible. This is where I think snowballing what we want, I think has the attractive potential that noticing all the hang-ups to getting there. Anyway, I think it's great to catalog those and be aware of them in order to consciously navigate them. But when it comes to these issues, I guess I'm seeing my biases towards the paradigm shift that we think is possible, that we see as possible, that we know.
Understanding people's actual desires is so important for that, because otherwise it's like, do people really desire this? The way they're acting, is that motivated by what they want or what they feel compelled or coerced into?
And from my experience, it's mostly their belief about what reality is, in terms of how people are, and that we can't be optimistic because it won't work out, and those people over there, they're against us, and so and then that turns into the self-confirmation of, I'm going to treat them like they hate me. And then I think you covered this in your slides.
As we just looking at the time, and as we kind of start to navigate towards the end of the session, I wonder if there are some voices who we haven't heard from that would like to make a contribution or ask a question or.
I just wanted to add that agreeing with everyone that has spoken before me is that I truly enjoyed the presentation. I remember reading Thomas Kuhn about 3 or 4 years ago, and I think the original application was, why are we reading this book? You know, and the biggest thing that came out it was understanding the paradigm shifts and relating that to the theory of change. And most importantly, recently recognizing its emphasis in integral theory. And as we talk about utopia versus dystopia, I think someone mentioned that. And then even going back to communicating across the divide, if I think of spiral dynamics and how as you move up the scope, the mental models really help us understand where everyone is coming from. And we have the choice to really understand where people are and where we are, and look for those common paths to move into the collaborative environment that we're speaking of. And, you know, as a very, very young leader, without all of the theory and application, I recognize just in watching people that conflict creates change. And so I think what you've established here today, and that we will continue to reestablish, is that the heretic can make positive change or negative change. Is how we relate to the heretic that's going to dictate how long that change takes to happen.
Yeah, it's so hard to support the heretic when there's so many social consequences to like supporting the heretic. It's almost a spiritual exercise. It's like, okay, am I going to dismiss the heretic like everyone, or am I going to stay quiet, or am I going to be like, wait a second, maybe they have something to say? Yeah.
I think
Sometimes
it's
I hide behind the excuse of, I say, I'm a Ravenclaw, I'm not a Gryffindor. I'm not the brave person. But we need brave people.
that's true.
Oh, Michael, okay.
I'd like to offer one more invitation to remark. When I love Ian McGilchrist, and when I try and distinguish, and of course, you know, 2 tomes into 2 words, how to distinguish, but 2 of the ways that I talk about it is that one side of the brain uses a map, and that it's a reduction, you know, and that the other is a compass, and that it's an orientation towards. And that it relies on not nouns and objects, but instead a sense. And I heard you today stick to the compass, sorry, the map side of the equation. And this sense of if there were an intuition of how to co-team together and co-orient towards the transcendent, or is there anything that comes to mind as a kind of activating the intuitive as a way of being in relation to the beyond? I know that's quite a question, but
Well, I mean, that's what I've been thinking about that a lot lately, because I'm trying to do a video on this. And I think the problem I keep running up against is that language is the left hemisphere. And so the right hemisphere way of being cannot fully be talked about. So anytime I try to talk about it, it's once again, it's back to the map. I mean, even a compass is a map, although I really like that analogy and I might use it because this directional orientation, I think, is exactly what it is. And that's what I was trying to say with the orientation toward truth as opposed to true false thing. But yeah, I find it, how do you talk about the right hemisphere's perspective when all language is left hemisphere? And it's so slippery. It's so slippery. So yeah, I'm probably going to use that compass analogy pretty soon.
Well, this has been an amazing conversation today, and I just want to thank you all for your presence, and Ashley for all that you brought into the presentation and the inquiry and all that you continue to bring to us, and to all of you for the work you're doing in on your respective paths to help us evolve our systemic consciousness. And yeah, it's funny. I was going to ask a question earlier about scale, because one of the things that I'm thinking about a lot is this question of scale. Scale really, we relate, at least in my experience, I relate most readily to the notion of scale from the reductionist perspective. That's my training about scale, scaling up, scaling out, making it, big, growth, and so, I mean, part of what I'm going to be meditating on as I leave today's conversation is what's the most intimate scale that we can connect on? Because to me, I think, as we're all kind of starting to point to here, is that the inner consciousness evolution that we are each doing on our own, and that we then bring into community here and conversation here, like in some ways that might be the right scale on which to evolve most fluidly. I don't know. That's just something I'm weighing. But certainly grateful for all of your presence, and want to just say thank you again to my colleagues in the System of Systems Thinkers, Felicia Chavez and Carolina Carballo. And grateful for you coming today, and hope you'll watch our prior conversations if you haven't already, and join us in future conversations as we continue to spotlight the work of amazing women like Ashley.
Yeah, and just on a practical note, we will send out follow-up with the recording of this conversation and the chat as well to everyone that registered. And as Carrie mentioned in the beginning, we will send out the official communication as soon as we open registrations, but you can save the date for September 17th for the next conversation in the series.
Thank you so much for organizing.
Catalytics Thinking Labs. Thank you, Ashley.
Yeah, thanks for organizing. Amazing job.
Have a great day, everybody. Thank
Bye,
you.
everyone.
Goodbye.